Logistics and Trucking Company. Our office is over in America's Central Port, over on the Illinois side of the river. So we are also one of those that cross the river. I wanted to kind of lay out the format for this evening. It's not going to be the typical kind of panel discussion that you usually have. This is going to be more of a living room discussion. So when we discuss transportation, we're going to start with talking about transportation and how it's going to affect St. Louis in the future. We're going to kind of just see where it goes from there. So we encourage everyone to ask questions, make comments, have your opinions while we're having all these discussions. We're going to talk amongst ourselves, but having you guys jump in and help us is really kind of the concept of the evening. We really want this to be kind of a town hall type of feel. So please be shy, and either Shay or Julie will be walking around with a microphone. If we can't hear you, we'll get you involved with that. So that would be most of it. Now I want to introduce our fine panel, and we'll start ladies first, of course, with Ms. Diane. Diane?
I'm Diane.
Get your microphone there.
There we go. Is it working?
Hello, good evening. Thank you for being here and inviting us to speak. I am Diane Hartenbach. I am Senior Account Representative for CSX Transportation on the intermodal side, and I'm also a board member of the Transportation Club of St. Louis.
My name is Terry Steve. I'm called a lot of things, but I'm truly an industrial real estate broker. We call ourselves a lot of different names now. I work for a worldwide company called Jones Lang LaSalle, and I guess my perspective will be one from the maybe marketing to prospects and what happens when a company chooses the St. Louis area and what they look for and kind of what happens.
And they showed a picture of the St. Louis football Cardinals. Terry actually played offensive line for the Big Red for 6 years. So, 9 years?
Yeah.
Oh, my fault, 9 years.
I'm John Hiles. I'm the Director of Global Transportation for Unigroup. And I'm here to talk a little bit about what we do, and that is we ship to and from 140 countries in the globe. Unfortunately, at this point, only about 5% of our business touches this greater St. Louis area, and I'd like to see that change. I'm a native of St. Louis. I was gone for a while, came back, and I've been in the transportation industry for the last 17 years.
My name is Greg Cosamatis. I came to St. Louis in 2004 to get my undergrad degree at St. Louis University. Fell in love with the city, and I've kind of bounced around business to business, in which I'm now currently employed at Anheuser-Busch. And up until about a month ago, I was in the transportation industry for almost 4 years, managing everything from truckloads to all non-beer freight through various modes, and making sure everybody gets beer that they need.
All right, very good. All right, so when we talk about transportation and logistics tonight, we're going to be talking about more than just moving product via rail, truck, air, barge, ocean. We're also going to be talking about the effects it has on the St. Louis economy and the job market and our current manufacturers that are here in St. Louis and how it attracts future business that we want to get into St. Louis. So we're going to start tonight on a positive note, because a lot of times when you get into these conversations, it seems to be negative, negative, negative. So at least we're going to start positive and kind of talk about the benefits that St. Louis has and what we do have to offer. So Terry, you want to take that first? And
Sure. And let me know if you can't hear me. But several years ago, a campaign, as you're all aware, River, Rail, Road, and Runway. And I thought that was a great slogan, a great campaign, the 4 R's. And that really speaks for St. Louis. I personally, and where we've seen a lot of growth is river and water. Not only river traffic, but St. Louis has a grand supply of cheap water. And we all see what's happening on the coast and those type of things. And And really with the breweries that we've had here over the years that are located on rivers and near water, Spectrum Brands, who fills, for lawn chemicals. But so that is a strength of our region, is the water and the river. Rail, I think we have a lot of connectivity, but I don't see a lot of usage, and we'll have some experts speak about that. But we don't, that has not been a driver, and Chairman Dunstan mentioned earlier, we are at the geographic center for population in the United States is about halfway between here and Kansas City. So that is a great thing. You can't, not say that's a positive thing. But those are really the benefits we have. And I would say this, that labor is becoming more and more important. In our world, when I first got in the business, the first question you asked the customer was where they lived, because obviously they would want to end up close to where they live. And that changed several years ago. Now they're concerned about where their employees are coming from and what the employee base is. And so that is a real driver, in those areas that have good employees, I think, have grown. And I think we've done a lot of work in Madison County at Gateway Commerce Center, and I attribute a lot of that growth is to really a very strong kind of a rural flavored workforce, and I think that's, in that instance, is a driver there.
Yeah, I know another positive, especially from on the trucking side, and even though a lot of times we complain about our traffic and stuff like that and all this bottlenecks, but actually St. Louis doesn't have a lot of congestion traffic-wise once it, if you compare it to the Chicagos and the Houstons and everything like that. So from a trucking standpoint, and if you're docile here as a trucking company, St. Louis is really trucking friendly when it comes to stuff like that. Now we could use some more truck stops and different stuff along those lines, but but when it comes to the congestions and everything like that, it's very good. How do we compare to, our neighbors, the Memphises, the Indianapolis, the Kansas Cities? I mean,
well, I guess it's a thing of age, but used to be, we'd get RFPs from a national broker, a search firm, and they would be searching Memphis, St. Louis, Indianapolis, or you just keep picking the cities, and you'd be one of several locations, and then sometimes you never heard of anything before. Now, in the last few years, if you get a call and you get asked for information, it's a real deal. Because now these things are driven by optimization studies that all these people do, and they've zeroed in because of cost where they want to be. And once they zero in, they're going to be in that region typically, unless something goes wrong terribly. But so it's not the mano on mano competition like it used to be, where you're saying, geez, Indy got that one on us. We don't even know. We don't even see the deals that want to go to Indy. And conversely, they don't see the deals that we see typically.
yeah. On the international side of it, is there any, we have 2 airports which are underutilized, but that's also somewhat on the transportation side of it, that can be a benefit, because then there's runway space and stuff like that. So that's a little bit down the road. But do you see anything else, John?
Well, I think the biggest challenge concerning an international air hub is getting a scheduled operation in here. Most all the cargo coming into the United States today has to move on air cargo carriers and not airlines. Part of that, it deals with the security ramifications that we deal with all the time. The other part of it has to do with cost. Many of our customers and many of our customer forwarders, they want to deal with the Chicago, Dallas, New York, Los Angeles. The problem with that is it's so far away from much of the other product that needs to be exported or imported. Most all of the cargo that comes into the United States today on surface comes into the ports on the east and the west coast and has to travel thousands of miles before it gets to this region. And Diana over here can attest to this. Generally, there's a cost of about $1,200 to $1,500 per container just to move it. And that's an additional cost that we, as consumers, pay here. And that's the same way for any corporation. It needs the raw materials, it needs the textiles to assemble, to make products, to make retail goods for resale. We need to be in that market. We need to be able to overcome those cost detriments to help our industry develop here. As I indicated earlier, our company deals with cargo that travels to and from 140 countries. And things that cost $1,200 for a single 2,000 cubic foot container, as an example, really pushes your expenses up. And you're not going to be able to compete until you can figure out a way to make that more effective. And in St. Louis, one of the things we mentioned during the planning session with the East West Authority was that St. Louis labor costs are substantially lower, and we have a very educated labor force here that's underutilized. And I think that's what Terry's talking about. These corporations are starting to take notice of that. And until we can get them to start coming in here, I think our transportation resources are also going to be underutilized and continue to be so. We need to find a way to better utilize probably our largest and cheapest mode of transportation, that's the river.
So what would be on top of that and compounding on that? What is some of more of the obstacles then that we see that St. Louis is up against, especially, you know, compared to Kansas City and probably Indianapolis and Memphis and stuff like that? What, you know, not really the negatives, but what's some of the obstacles that we have, both globally and just locally? When people look at St. Louis and want to bring their business here, what are we lacking?
Well, I think Terry touched on one of those topics already, and it's starting to swing in our favor, and that is they don't know us, especially internationally. They think of St. Louis as a flyover area, the Midwest. They know about Chicago, they know about Los Angeles, they also know about San Francisco, Miami. You talk to somebody in Latin America, Central or South America, and they know where Chicago is, and they know where Miami is, and you tell them St. Louis, and they think they might know.
Somewhere there in the middle.
Somewhere in the middle. And those that travel, they fly into New York, and then they go to Los Angeles. And then they go home. Okay? And when you say, well, we're somewhere in the middle there, they say, oh, you mean the flyover states? You know, I've heard it regularly. And I said, you ought to stop sometime, because we've got a lot here to offer, and those who do stop are shocked what St. Louis has to offer. And we need to get that word out to globally. And when I say St. Louis, I'm talking about, as the chairman mentioned, 750 miles surrounding this area, because it's truly the Midwest. And the Midwest has a tremendous amount to offer.
Well, why wouldn't
No, go ahead.
I can hear you.
what's the reason that we aren't known then? Why aren't we known? I mean, there's a lot that goes on here. So what is it that makes us unknown?
Yeah, I think a little bit of it is you know, like for instance, Kansas City decided to come up with a tagline that they were going to become a smart port. Okay, well, that was really just a tagline. They really didn't change anything. But they kind of, you know, became a one voice type of, you know, they kind of had a one voice and a one marketing plan, and, you know, they became a smart port. And so people picked up on that, especially with, you know, everybody going green and all this stuff. So corporations and everything else picked up on that. And I don't think St. Louis has had that one voice, that common voice of kind of, we are St. Louis, this is what we are. It's, you know, to me it seems just a little more divided up, whether you're on the Illinois side or on the St. Charles side or, you know, Jefferson County. So I think some of it is that.
But Brad, don't you think Tri-City Port, when they changed to Mid-America's Port, I mean, wasn't that kind of what the young lady's talking about, or you're talking about trying to brand and help
Yeah.
people understand that we're in middle America. You know,
Yeah, and then they
your
changed
point.
it into America Central Port, so
Yeah.
gotta keep up with them. But no, but I think that's some of it. It's just as a community, and I know I know there's, different agencies now, and, we've actually hired a advertising firm who are actually working on this to, kind of stick our hand up and put a flag up and say we are here and this is what we do have to offer. And I don't know if we've done that all that successfully in the past.
Well, and really to grow in today's world, you need private equity money, you need money from foreign governments. I mean, that's what's fueling a lot of the real estate growth. And those people analyze the entire United States and they look for areas of growth, obviously. And so we're kind of in a catch-22. You look at St. Louis's economic growth over the last 10 years, it's nothing to get probably real excited about when you look at how things are going to change. And how do you do that? And I mean, but that's what gets attention to the money people is, good trending. They got a bright future, and I don't think they have a poor future, but we just aren't putting up good numbers that people are going, wow,
Yeah, and we've lost a lot of manufacturers and people that actually make product. So I think that just has a spiral effect of there's less product coming in.
So
there's
I
less
think
trucks
that's
coming in.
actually a really good point. Aside, we're known for sports, Cardinals, and for beer. Those are our two main things. So maybe it's not enough for people to stop. Maybe it's not enough then for people to give you business. We can hear you anyway. Don't we?
Yeah.
Maybe that's not enough for people to get off airplanes for. Maybe the blues would be, and some of the bluegrass festival, maybe a stronger art center. I can think of a lot of things, but I also know that currently the money people are investing in things that aren't making things necessarily, and you're not going to pick up your export business with a lot of the stuff that's getting invested in currently, big dollars. So, what can be done about that to shift it more into manufacturing, which I think needs to happen.
Yeah, because we've, there's talk we've become a really good IT niche, where IT companies are coming here. And well, that's great because we, kind of need anything we can get, but it does not produce a lot of jobs and it doesn't bring raw materials in, and so we're not shipping them back out. So, it's a big chicken for the egg of, we truly need companies to come in and manufacture here.
I'm actually an implant from Chicago to St. Louis, so I'm the opposite of these guys. And I've been in the transportation business for about 28 years now, and I remember St. Louis used to be a huge hub, mecca, and I don't know the history on why the airlines pulled out, the car companies pulled out, but my suggestion would be to look at, because I think the personal aspect of people getting off planes, it's a great city to come to. I love it. It's wonderful, but that's not going to bring in the manufacturing and bring the industry back. And I think that's probably key to what the city needs to look at is what drove them out and what's bringing them into some of these other cities.
And for myself and the younger generation, the reason why I came to St. Louis was education. And I think St. Louis has started to make a predominant name for itself in terms of the quality education and the geographical location. I can't tell you how many people, I'm originally from Wisconsin, I can't tell you how many people from Wisconsin have flocked to St. Louis for that education because it's still got that Midwestern feel to it, and it's not too far away from home, and your neighboring city is Kansas City and Chicago. And it's not just myself that has fallen in love with the culture of St. Louis, because St. Louis does have a lot to offer. And when these young students and young professionals start to kind of develop St. Louis as their second home, it's important for St. Louis to maintain job opportunities to try and hold on to them, because I'm fortunate that a good amount of my college friends are still in St. Louis, but there's also a good portion of them that have left. So that in line, in turn is a whole other challenges, in line with the manufacturing and the transportation industry, but we have to create jobs and employment opportunities. And for myself, that was definitely a challenge for me to stay in St. Louis. And I'm fortunate that I found some opportunities that allowed me to stay here, but it was not an easy task by any means. But I mean, I think the economic development is improved over the last couple of years. It's slightly better than it used to be, but it's still not an easy feat.
Yeah, I have a question that's maybe a slightly different slant on that, and that is we all know that the digital economy has changed everything, whether it's publishing or big box stores and soon to be other areas, universities, things like that. And I know that the traditional cost structure in terms of low to high for transportation is ocean and barge and then rail and then trucking and then air freight at the top. Has the digital revolution in any way, shape, form, either because of throughput, lots of packages, or for technology or for some other reason? I'm sure the order is still the same, but have any of them started converging on each other? Does digital change anything about the interaction of the different modes of transportation? Is air getting cheaper relative to truck, or truck getting cheaper relative to, has any of that changed because of the digital economy?
Tackle that one.
I'll give it a shot.
Yeah, that's a very good question.
It's a very good question. I'm not sure I can do it justice, but you see, if you take a look at where the distribution centers are for these big box stores coming into the United States, because frankly, the big box stores buy where? Overseas.
Yeah.
Okay, they ship in, the Walmarts, the Home Depots, the Lowe's, and we can go on and on. If you look at the Savannah Port Authority as an example, Savannah was a dying port, and about 5 years ago, the state of Georgia and the federal government decided to put money in there, and they built a modern port that could handle as much as what Norfolk, Virginia can handle, but more importantly, they built the railheads that came into it. Now, why am I telling you this? Because the big box distribution centers on the East Coast then built onto the port. So their containers, where everything comes in the containers, don't even have to leave the port. Well, they have to leave the fenced area of the port, but they drive down the road, they pull into the docks, and they've even installed a non-combustion truck system that can bring those containers to the warehouses. And they can handle as many as 500 containers at a time, unloading them into the distribution center, and on the other side, breaking it down and putting it on trucks going wherever it needs to go, or into rail cars to go on Diana's trains to go inland to different points like that. Now, those are distribution centers for the big box stores. But then you start talking about companies that are involved in the mail order business, the online mail order business, like Cabela's, like Amazon, some of the other ones I don't know, Google, and so forth. They have strategically located distribution centers and secondary distribution centers. The secondary distribution centers are the ones that we could grab here because we are centrally located. The primaries are on the coasts.
Well, just to follow up on that just for a second. As you know, the Panama Canal is being expanded, and it's going to be able to handle the biggest ships there are. Well, a lot of people, and the West Coast is kind of congested from stuff coming in from China and all across the Pacific. Plus, you got to deal with the Longshoremen's Union and all that stuff over there. What's to prevent St. Louis from making a bid for having those boats come through the Panama Canal up the Mississippi River and spreading it out to this 50% of the country's population? Why not have barges come up the river filled with those containers?
Yeah, actually, America's Central Port is, they're not finished with construction yet, but they are constructing a port in order to do that. The problems that they have right now is basically the depth of the Mississippi. Since the depth of it, you got to have a big enough barge to put enough containers on it to make it worthwhile. There is some containers that go up as far as Memphis. They've had a little success with it, but not that much. And St. Louis is definitely interested in it, especially with as much bar traffic as we have to begin with. But it's the big issue they've had is having someone invest in the actual barge, to take that first step to invest in the barges. And then the second one is just with the depth of the river, you can't get enough containers on it to make it worthwhile. And there's still a lot of the mentality of the just in time. You know, it's going to take, what's it take, 21 days or something like that from New Orleans to St. Louis. Not counting how long it took for it to get from Asia or South America or Central America or something like that. So you're talking a lot of time. I think it's something that can happen in the future, but we'll see if it can happen. A lot of it will have to do with the depth of the Mississippi.
You know, one of the other considerations there too is you need a lot of containers and a lot of cargo to support that type of operation. And although we would love to see that kind of business coming into St. Louis, the reality is we need more ports on the river that will help support it, not only coming in, but also going back out. Because carriers don't want to bring the containers in here and get them stuck in St. Louis. In fact, I had dinner with a gentleman today with one of the ocean carriers, and that's one of their biggest concerns, is getting the empty containers back to the coast where they can reload them and ship it back out. We have the product here in the Midwest to get back out that the globe needs in the form of agricultural products, as well as seed corn, soybeans, a lot of refrigerated cargo for export. We need to be able to also attract those same ocean carriers to calling New Orleans as a port instead of going to Mobile or to Miami and Houston alone. And with the advent of the mega cargo vessels of the 18 and 20,000 container ships, there are going to be fewer international ports in the United States serviced directly by those ships. And we need one of those, at least one of those in the Gulf, that then could be serviced by a feeder vessel and get the carriers coming into New Orleans. That's key to it. And the other alternative is that they can dredge it deep enough, then they can bring them partway up, as they did in Europe and some of the other places of the world. Yes?
John, how cost effective is it to bring things into Long Beach in Seattle and then put it on a train and ship it all the way across the country versus bringing it through the Panama Canal, coming into New Orleans, and then coming up by train to distribution points like St. Louis to distribute it throughout that 750-mile area?
Well, from a cost perspective, coming out of Seattle into the Midwest, it's about $1,200 or more to get it to the railhead. And then you still have to put it on a truck and get it to the distribution point. So that's not very cost effective. The flip side of that is right now, we really don't have a means to move it up from New Orleans, except by truck. We don't have a very good rail service that comes that direction.
Right, but as the Panama Canal expansion completes, my railroad and the others I'm sure as well have been preparing to be able to service that because we would much rather prefer to handle it on the East Coast and bring it in. Back in the day, in order for rail service to be cost effective, it had to be a minimum of 900 miles, and that has really changed over the last several years, and now really CSX, we look at anything 550 miles and up can really be not only cost competitive but also service competitive because the service has improved. So when Brad was saying about the 10 or 11 days coming down the river, rail used to be like that, but now in many, many markets we can be as effective as a truck. So, and on the rail perspective of St. Louis, used to be a huge rail network. That capacity is still there. the rails can increase capacity, but it has to have value to us as well. And again, that's where the costs come in. You have to be willing to pay for it. Otherwise, we can't put the capital into it. Railroads are self-funded and self-served, so we don't have the federal funding. We alone, CSX has put $2.3 billion of capital into the railroad this year, and for the past 5 years, we've done the same thing, double stacking, putting in environmentally friendly technology and cranes, and to actually set ourselves up to be a viable option for when the Panama Canal opens, and we call that the National Gateway.
Could you talk about what's allowed the railroad to become more competitive at the shorter distances, and do you see that trend continuing, like to even shorter distances?
I don't know that it would be to shorter distances, who knows, but in 2013, we got it down very, very well. A lot of network design really kind of drove that, because before we used to try to be everything to everybody, and so we would have stop after stop after stop. We want to go here, we want to go there, we want to go, and that just adds on time. And then you have to have the right resources in the right places. Technology with locomotives, the redesign of the network, where we really focused on what we do best and what we could do the quickest, and cut out a lot of the stuff that we didn't do very well. My network, we've actually gone to a hub and spoke sort of a design, where we have a facility in Northwest Ohio that we run many, many different lanes into there, and it opens up it takes more time, but it gets us to more places much more efficiently, and the more that we drive into it, the more efficiencies we get and the more cost we drive out of it.
And another flip side of that is their prices have gotten more competitive, but a lot of it is the trucking prices have gone up, and that their prices have gone up. So it's more of, I think, their prices probably haven't changed all that much. It's just the price of trucking and the transportation and stuff like that. Like the market in St. Louis, another issue why St. Louis has trouble with growth and attracting business is the cost for hiring a truck per se in St. Louis is actually very high. Our cost of living and everything else nationwide, is cheaper, but actually to find a truck and that cost of transportation is actually higher for a company that's docile here in St. Louis. A lot of that has to do with, there's just not that many truck lines in St. Louis that call the St. Louis area home anymore. There's some down in Joplin and stuff like that, up in Chicago and stuff like that, but there's just not that many things. So when a company decides to, whether they're going to do business here or expand, some companies, we've met with, they've actually sent manufacturing to other parts of the country where they'd rather manufacture in St. Louis, because you just can't find trucks in St. Louis. It's a drive-through state most of the time. And if they do stop to unload, it's usually at the P&G or a Dial or somebody that's going to take that truck, reload it, and off it goes. So there's not, it goes back to the whole manufacturing everything. Since there's not a huge demand for trucks in St. Louis, but there's enough of demand that you just don't see those, trucks get empty enough. So that's, definitely a factor.
The whole trucking industry everywhere, not just St. Louis, is challenged due to regulations that are being put in, and emissions and driver challenges, driver shortages all over the entire United States. So
driver shortages is about the biggest deal. Al Hershey, you want to comment on the driver shortage?
Well, in the United States, we're basically going to be 1 million drivers short in the near future.
And the reason why is that older people that drove a truck are through generations. Someone, you know, the kid would drive the truck after his dad drove the truck. Well, they're not doing that anymore. The regulations that she said is stymied it. Bill Ferrick's back here has a truck line, been in business for 65 years. He doesn't look that old, but but he's been around 65 years, and he'll tell you that, you know, basically it's a catch-22 to where you have to have 2 years experience to get behind the wheel, but you can't get behind the wheel because you can't get the experience.
You can't be an interstate driver until you're 21. And by the time the kids that are not college bound decide what they're going to do, they've already found another future for themselves, whether it be trade labor or what have you. They're already, the truck drivers that we're now fielding are the guys that have lost out, that are 55 years old and their jobs are eliminated and they can't find work. So they go to truck driving school. That's what's out there, which is good, except for they're not very long.
Longevity.
You know, they're not long term.
Well, to me, if you ask me how does St. Louis or any region grow, it's always the next best great idea. We need a great idea. Is it Microsoft? Is it training truck drivers? I don't know. I'm just saying, what's the next great idea? It's population. We have a small population compared to New York. It's that simple. They consume more than they produce. It's cheaper to ship out. And this area has always been a deficit for trucks because it's unusual. It doesn't sound like it, the way I think we produce more than we consume. I guess there's just not enough people living here. You got Anheuser-Busch, you got Monsanto, you got Emerson, all that other stuff. So to me, it's the next great idea.
So that brings up another topic that I think is within the next 3 to 5 years is going to be the biggest game changer in terms of transportation, specifically not just for the United States, but also for St. Louis. And that is the development of same-day delivery with major tech companies such as Google and Amazon that is developing right now throughout the United States. What started in the dot-com bubble in the late 1990s, a series of companies started to identify a need or an opportunity to sell consumer-based goods with same-day delivery to your front door. Well, what ended up happening is the concept was great, but they underestimated the cost for expedited services and what we tend to call last-mile delivery. And where they generated revenue, they developed massive debt because of the transportation cost. Well, the few companies that survived or that flourished are at it again. And they've got deep pockets and they are butting heads and they are competing to who is going to dominate the market with this need. And the two predominant players are Amazon, which their new market is called Amazon Fresh, and obviously Google Shopping Express. So they are offering, you can buy anything from dairy products to designer clothing or ukuleles or whatever you can think of to your door within either a 1 hour window or a 4 hour window that same day. Well, what does that mean for transportation? That is going to be what we typically classify as courier services or last mile delivery. And it is developed and is already underway in Los Angeles, San Francisco, Manhattan, and Chicago. And there's a lot of money behind it. Google's already invested $500 million in these small areas. Well, they're not small, but the few areas that they're operating in. And their struggle is drivers. So they're building and creating a demand for drivers and courier services that have never been there before. There's a lot of young guys, there's a lot of people that have never thought about joining this type of industry that are now getting their hands into it, which goes back to that next big idea. And for the transportation industry, this could very well be it, because it's going to create visibility and demand for drivers and the industry for transportation. What their challenges are currently are not only, number one, finding drivers, but also the quality of drivers. So they are creating these new young professionals in the transportation industry, and they're lacking service and quality. So how are the carriers combating that? Well, they're increasing benefits, wages. They're making it more lucrative and desirable for people to join this industry. So as that demand continues and is going to develop throughout the United States, I can guarantee you probably 95% of everybody in this room within the next 5 years is going to be ordering their goods and services on their cell phone apps and getting it delivered to your front door. What is unique about the two different models is Amazon is based on warehousing. So their objective is to buy out warehousing throughout the United States. So when you order lettuce, it's coming from their warehouse, their local warehouse in St. Louis. Whereas Google, their infrastructure and their design is to have their courier services go into those local produce stores and stuff down the street, and then they bring it to you. So they're actually working with local businesses and existing companies, and they're doing, they're their personal shopper. So that's why there's a big kind of chaos right now for these industries that are providing these goods and services, because do they want to get pushed out by Amazon and their warehousing, which is going to lead to a different type of transportation with refrigeration, intermodal services, truckload services with the courier, or is it going to be more friendly with Google, where they're shaking hands and they're utilizing pre-existing or encouraging growth within businesses within the St. Louis area? So pretty interesting, and St. Louis is not next on the list, but it's coming and it's already in major cities. So it'll be interesting to see what that does to courier services in St. Louis.
And Greg, one of the other things that comes up frequently when you're talking about driver shortages and targeting, and Al, you know this from historically, we got a lot of our drivers leaving the armed services in the past. And today, one of the big cultural problems we have is those same people who are leaving the services are saying, you know what, I've been away from my family a long time, I don't want to drive across the country. But this gives them an opportunity to drive locally, to be home at night, or in the morning, depending on how you look at it, and maybe working overnight, but they're home. And maybe that's a transitional process, because once they get into the industry, then maybe they branch out. So rather than looking at it as competition, maybe we should look at that as a hiring pool, because this is an opportunity to overcome the issue concerning experience, because maybe they can get the licensing that they can't get for the big rigs because they're driving small shuttles.
Well, one thing with trucking though that needs to happen is the education process. Because again, I talked about Del Ferrix, his company runs within 200 miles of St. Louis for the most part. That's his sweet spot. Everybody thinks the trucker is going to be gone forever. They aren't. They may or they may not be. Some truckers are couriers. Some people are regional. Some people do relays. They're trying to get people home. Some drivers don't want to be home every night. Sorry. Some people don't want to be home more than a couple days a week. And, I know people on that panel, but but the end of the story is it's an educational process. There are going to be things like Greg's talking about, the panel discussed. The intermodal is a great idea. People the real problem in the United States is they need better planning and manufacturing. The just-in-time is really very, very, very slippery slope. If you go to a grocery store right now, I guarantee if you on the back of that building, there's nothing in there. If you have a catastrophe right now in the United States, you're going to see something that's going to open everybody's eyes. There's nothing there. Everything is just in time like that.
Nobody
You
wants
need
to
to have,
carry the inventory.
right, and they'll put it on rail enough because it might take an extra day or two, you know? I mean, and now you got a new carrier out there that's a runner, but they're called lightweight long haul carriers, and they won't put over 30,000 pounds in a truck. I mean, but to me, it's an educational process. Not all, I mean, these are $150,000 pieces of equipment. They're nice. They're nicer than any car in that parking lot, except for Terry's. And, I mean, you don't have a spring coming through your butt unless you buy a new Kia, but, you know, I'm sorry, but but that is the thing. There's a misconception.
Brad, I think you've got a question. Right?
Oh, yeah, go ahead, Mike.
A couple of things. If Northwest Arkansas can attract Walmart, why can't St. Louis find businesses like that and get them in? That's question number one. And question number two, Diane, why is O'Hare the world's busiest airport?
I don't know. I stay out of there as frequently as I can.
I guess just from the sheer numbers of it, it's because there's a reason to go there, and that they probably get more business by accident in Chicago than we get on purpose here in St. Louis. By just sheer numbers. I mean, if you've got a truckload of stop-offs and part of it's in Illinois, you can bet it's going to go to Chicago. You coined two phrases tonight that were really interesting. One was fly over, and the other was drive through. And I think part of the problem could be mentality of our culture here in St. Louis. A lot of us have lived other places, gone other places. I've worked in New York City for 1 year. It was always one of my dreams to hit the street in New York and see if I could make it. But I'm not sure that we put enough effort into bringing in world-class companies here. Somebody did a good job on Express Scripts. I don't know who it was, but I really think that if our focus could be on that, on bringing in these world-class companies, because e-commerce has transformed our entire country, or the world actually. So we could, using that, along with going after aggressively, doing whatever it takes to get these companies in. Nashville got the Nissan plant, 10,000 workers, 6 years ago, 7 years ago. So,
And I think IKEA coming in, I think that's actually, a good feather in our cap. I think it kind of shows, our neighbors and everyone else that, a big company can come in like St. Louis and choose us. Terry, what else? I know this is, your profession. So what have you, when you've tried to sell St. Louis and stuff like that, I mean, is it the lack of labor or what? I mean, what do you see as the biggest hang-ups to answer Mike's question?
I feel like we don't have that many at-bats. We really don't have that many real projects that everybody's excited about and everybody's chasing hard. And, this is not new news, but right to work is an issue. When these site selectors, and you've all heard it, but, the states without right to work, they don't even make the first cut. And, it'll be interesting to see what happens in Michigan and if there's any objective proof one way or the other how that goes. But we need to see more deals than we have over the last 10, 15 years. They're just not enough.
You see a growth in all the class ones are investing a lot in domestic intermodal, and you see a lot of intermodal facilities popping up in Vienna, Kansas City, UP down in just outside of El Paso. You guys and you're are investing a lot on the CSX, OCNS, all of them are doing it. And domestic intermodal, if I'm not wrong, is one of the big growth areas besides oil and all that.
Absolutely.
Could you comment on if St. Louis is situated in any way to take advantage of that going forward? Do you have any thoughts on that? And we talked about the 750 miles. We're within 750 miles of Chicago, and there's a 1,000-pound gorilla. How much does that shadow hurt St. Louis, if at all?
If I could start this.
Please.
You know, we've got a number of customers here in the 100-mile radius of St. Louis, and we can't get their product out in an economical manner right now. Many of them want to avoid Chicago, and many customers avoid Chicago as often and as much as possible. The problem is, you have to go there to get out. That's the closest place. We're talking about ground transportation now. If you have small shipments, I'm talking about 200, 300, 400 cubic feet type shipments, we don't have a viable consolidation capability here at this point. We've got the intermodal capability. We could start some freight stations here that would consolidate that freight for us, but we've got to have the freight to do so. And if we had it here, we would be taking business away from Chicago simply because it takes too much time to get it there and get it out. One of the things that we touched on briefly had to do with the airports. We've talked a lot about service, but air cargo coming into St. Louis right now, we really don't have much. Mainly because people say, well, the airlines really, the air carriers say, we want to go into Chicago, we want to go into Dallas. We don't want to fly into these other places because what's our backlog? Same thing as on trucks. But we have it. It's just a matter of not taking it to Chicago or Dallas and bringing it through our own hubs here. I have customers in South America, in Argentina, Chile, Peru, Brazil, Uruguay, who want to bring cargo into the central part of the United States. You know where they have to bring it in today? Miami. Yep. You know how long it takes to get a set of cargo out of Miami once it arrives? 4 days. 4 days. And by truck, you can then have to get it to St. Louis, it's another 2 to 3 days. That's 7 days on a product that if they flew it into the Midwest, would be there already. And if it's a perishable product, like some of our customers have, you get 7 more days of shelf life. And right back to what Al was talking about concerning, I think it was you, Al, that was talking about the produce in the back room. Now you have fresher product than ever. Today we're working with a customer that's bringing cargo up from Mexico through the St. Louis area, believe it or not, on its way to Chicago and other places within the Midwest. We need more of those. You know, we're talking about berries, cherries, those sorts of high-value fruits that can absorb that additional cost. So back to the point, there's a lot that we can do that's going on. We just need to attract more of it and gain the confidence and the knowledge with the producers out there. We have the product to ship. We just have to make it economical enough.
What about the capital investment in St. Louis that he's talking about? Do you think the rails are?
If there's a demand, then absolutely. But if, you know, to fill a train, you have to be able to fill X amount of train cars, which is more, usually the cost for a train start, a new train start, is very expensive. So unless you have, you know that demand is going to be there and you have that. And today, CSX serves St. Louis to the northeast. The Norfolk Southern services St. Louis to the northeast and Florida. We could add a Florida service, but it would just basically be taking the freight away from the NS and getting it on us. And that, I mean, unless there's a demand to add capacity, which we absolutely can do, as well as the BN and the UP going to the West Coast, they can do it. Now, for instance, when you look at profitability and you're a large corporation, with the UP in general, they can move their containers from Dallas to LA and LA to Dallas and make a lot more money than you can make going from Dallas to St. Louis to get a box to go to LA. You know, it's more economical for them to go straight from Dallas to LA and get that load off the West Coast. than it is to tie up their equipment and put it into St. Louis, unless there's a demand for it.
Hector?
Well, I would like to see the panel. I see most of you or all of you talk about investment. And I like this city. I love St. Louis. I live in Indianapolis. I live in Miami. I was there last week. And I would like to see in that panel people from the local government. I know there are initiatives like the Mosaic project that trying to bring business. But I think one of the advantages that you mentioned with Texas, San Antonio, is the taxes. They lower the taxes and of course, most of the business, because the profit and the bottom line are going there. So